The man chained to his wrist was a bounty hunter. The woman he was dragging through the blizzard was his prisoner. But in the white hell of the Arizona mountains, with the wind screaming like a banshee, the line between lawman and outlaw, captor and captive, was about to be buried forever. One of them was hunting for money. The other was running for her life. But in this storm, they would only find survival or death together. Hello, and welcome to Frontier Rescue Stories. My name is Jasper Dave, and I am so glad you've joined us for tonight's tale. Before we follow these two souls into the storm, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy stories of love, survival, and redemption on the unforgiving frontier, please take a moment to click that like button. Even better, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new tale. Your support helps us reach a larger audience and bring more of these stories to life. And please, leave a comment below telling us what part of the world you're watching from today. We love to hear from you. Now, let's get lost in the storm. The Arizona Territory in the fall of 1886 was a tinderbox waiting for a spark. A blazing, merciless summer had scorched the prairies and baked the high country, leaving the land brittle and the hearts of its people even harder. It was a land of harsh edges and short tempers, and no one knew that better than Jonah, Flint McAllister. Jonah was a man carved from the rock and silence of the high peaks. He was a bounty hunter, but he had not always been. Years ago he had been a husband and a father, a man who knew how to laugh. But the fever that swept through his small homestead had respected no fences. It had taken his wife, then his young son, leaving Jonah with nothing but a cold fire pit and a silence so profound it had hollowed him out. He had buried them, sold the land, and turned his face to the only thing that made sense anymore. He became a man who hunted other men for money. His heart, he figured, was as frozen as the peaks he slept under, and he preferred it that way. His new bounty was a woman. Jonah hated capturing women. It was messy, unpredictable work. But the bounty was high, posted by a wealthy, powerful man in Prescott named Marcus Thorne. The charge was theft. The woman, Eliza Vance, had apparently stolen a fortune in jewels and cash from her fiancé. Thorne himself. Jonah tracked her for 3 weeks. Not with anger, but with the relentless, plodding patience of a glacier. He was a force of nature, and he always got his mark. He found her in Bitter Creek, a dying town that was little more than a collection of leaning shacks and broken dreams. She was in the last place he expected, the saloon, working as a server, her fine Eastern clothes traded for a drab, patched calico dress. He watched her for an hour from the shadows of the saloon. She was beautiful. There was no denying it, with hair the color of a raven's wing and eyes that held a defiant fire. She moved with a grace that was entirely out of place, and when the proprietor, a greasy man with a mean streak, grabbed her arm, she didn't flinch. She simply met his gaze with a cold fire until he, unnerved, let her go. She was a survivor. Jonah respected that, but it didn't change the job. He waited until she was leaving, heading to a small room she'd rented above the abandoned general store. He stepped from the alley, his tall frame blocking the moonlight. "Miss Eliza Vance?" She didn't scream or run. She simply froze, her hand flying to a small satchel. "Who's asking?" He pushed back his duster, revealing the badge and the iron cuffs on his belt. "Jonah McAllister. I have a warrant for your arrest from Prescott." Her face went pale, but her eyes blazed. "I am innocent." "You don't understand. The man who posted that bounty, Marcus Thorne, he's a monster. You're making a mistake." Jonah sighed. He had heard it all before. Every soul he'd ever cuffed was innocent, framed, or misunderstood. "You can tell your story to the judge in Prescott, ma'am. My job is just to get you there. He'll kill me before I ever see a judge," she cried, desperation finally breaking through her composure. "That's why he posted the bounty. He knows a man like you will do his dirty work. He's paying you to murder me." Her words struck a nerve. He'd seen bounties like that before, dead or alive warrants that were just legal assassination. But this one was for retrieval. "The warrant says alive, Miss Vance, and I always deliver what the warrant asks for." She saw there was no arguing. She was defiant, but not a fool. She lifted her chin. "Then do what you have to do." Jonah nodded, a flicker of grudging respect in his eyes. He methodically secured her hands with the cuffs. "We ride in the morning. Be ready." As he turned to leave, a gust of wind hit the street, sharp and unnaturally cold. It carried the first few snowflakes, tiny and hard as sand. Jonah looked up at the sky, which was turning a sick, bruised gray. An old-timer huddled by the saloon door coughed into his hand. "That's a great die-up wind, friend," the old man wheezed, the term ranchers used for the catastrophic blizzards that could wipe out entire herds. "Nature's setting her stage for the big one." Jonah ignored him. He checked his horse, bought supplies, and paid for a room in the saloon, sleeping across the doorway of Eliza's room. He was a professional. No storm was going to stop him. He was wrong. The old-timer's warning was lost in the first true gust, which hit them like a physical blow not 5 miles out of Bitter Creek. The snow didn't begin to fall. It manifested, a solid vertical wall of white that erased the world. The temperature didn't drop. It plummeted, as if the bottom had fallen out of the sky. Jonah had survived 20 winters in the high country, but this was different. This was a monster. This was the white hell. The wind howled, a physical living thing that screamed in their ears and tore the breath from their lungs. Within an hour they were lost, the trail gone, the landmarks buried. "We have to go back." Eliza shouted over the storm, her voice barely a whisper. "There is no back," Jonah yelled, pulling his horse's rein. "We can't even find our own tracks." Their horses, strong mountain-bred animals, panicked. They whinnied in terror, fighting the wind, their legs sinking deep into the rapidly accumulating drifts. Jonah's gelding went down first, breaking a leg in a hidden crevice. Jonah cut it loose with a grim face, a single bullet ending its misery. Eliza's mare lasted another hour before it simply stopped, shivering violently. Its head hung low. It was frozen on its feet. They were stranded, on foot. In a blizzard that was already being called the Great Die-Up, Jonah grabbed his rifle and the saddlebags, which held their meager food and ammunition. He unhooked the chain from his saddle and locked one cuff on Eliza's wrist and the other on his own. "What are you doing?" she screamed. "Keeping us together," he roared back. "If we get separated by 6 feet, we die." He pulled her into the blinding white. It was no longer a capture. It was a desperate march for survival. He was dragging her, and she was stumbling, but she never fell. She fought the snow with a grim, silent tenacity that impressed him. For what felt like hours, they stumbled through a nightmare. The cold was a physical pain, a needle-sharp invasion that stole the feeling from their hands and feet. The world was nothing but the screaming wind and the punishing, blinding white, just when Jonah thought they were finished, that he would die chained to a woman he didn't know. He fell forward, his face hitting something hard, wood. It was a line shack, a tiny 8-by-10-foot hut used by ranchers to shelter in storms, abandoned and half buried in the snow. It was a tomb, but it was shelter. He kicked the frozen door open, and they fell inside, collapsing onto the dirt floor in a heap of snow and exhaustion. For a long time they just lay there, gasping, the silence of the tiny room a shocking relief from the wind's deafening roar. Jonah, moving with painful stiffness, got to the fireplace. There was a small pile of wood, blessedly dry. He used his flint and steel, and in a few minutes a small, weak fire was crackling, casting a dim, flickering light. Eliza was huddled by the wall, shivering so violently her teeth rattled. Jonah, in a moment of pure practicality, unlocked the cuffs. He couldn't risk her freezing to death on one side of the room. But he was still a bounty hunter. He took a length of rope and tied her ankle to a heavy iron ring set in the hearthstone, leaving her just enough slack to reach the fire. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, his voice rough. "But it has to be this way." She just nodded, her eyes dark with a fear that went beyond the cold. He had saved her from the storm, only to put her back in chains. The storm raged for 3 days. The psychological toll was immense. The tiny shack became a world, a prison, a refuge. They were trapped, forced into an intimacy that was agonizing. He would melt snow for water, handing her the cup. He divided their last piece of hardtack, giving her the larger half. She, in turn, watched him. She saw he hadn't slept, his rifle always across his lap, his eyes on the door. He wasn't just guarding her. He was guarding them both. On the 3rd day, the firewood ran out. The cold in the shack became lethal. "Stay here," he ordered. He tied a rope around his waist, handing her the other end. "If I'm not back in 10 minutes, and pull. If the rope goes slack, pull." He plunged out into the white hell. Eliza held the rope, her hands raw, her heart in her throat. He was her captor, the man taking her to her doom, but he was also the only human being on this frozen earth. She felt a terrifying, confusing knot in her stomach. She didn't want him to die. 5 minutes passed, 10. The rope was taut. Then it went slack. Panic seized her. She pulled, hauling with all her strength, her feet slipping on the dirt floor. He emerged through the doorway, a ghost covered in ice, dragging 2 frozen fence posts. He had risked his life for firewood, for their survival. As he collapsed by the fire, struggling to breathe, their eyes met. The dynamic of captor and captive was gone, buried under tons of snow. They were just 2 people, desperately trying to see the next sunrise. The wind stopped. After 3 days of a constant, deafening scream, the silence that fell over the world was absolute. It was more terrifying than the storm itself. Jonah and Eliza had survived the white hell, but now they faced a new, quieter enemy: starvation. They were low on food, weak, and still trapped by snowdrifts as high as the cabin's roof. The thaw began not in the world outside, but in the small, cramped space between them. The shared trauma had broken down the walls of bounty hunter and fugitive. Jonah sat staring into the low fire, the exhaustion of the past days and the past years settling on him like a shroud. He looked at Eliza, who was patching his torn duster, her stitches small and neat. She was quiet, capable, and hadn't complained once. "My wife, Sarah, she died of fever," Jonah said suddenly, the words tearing out of him, rough as granite. "My boy, too, just gone. 1 week they were laughing. The next I was digging." Eliza's hand stilled. She looked at him, her eyes soft with an empathy he hadn't seen in years. "There's nothing you can do against a fever," Jonah continued, his voice thick. "Can't shoot it, can't fight it, it just takes. After that, I didn't have much use for people, so I started hunting them. The dead can't disappoint you. And the living? Seems they're all liars one way or another." His words hung in the air, a raw, open wound. Eliza set the duster aside. "Not all of them, Jonah." He looked at her, his gaze sharp. "You still claiming you're innocent?" "I am," she said, her voice clear and strong. "And I'll tell you why." His vulnerability had earned her trust. She told him everything. She had been an orphan, taken in by Marcus Thorne as his ward, then his fiancé. He was a pillar of the community in Prescott, wealthy, respected. But he was also cold, possessive. His first wife, she fell down the stairs, Eliza said, her voice trembling. Everyone said it was a tragedy. She told him how, 2 nights before their wedding, she had found a hidden box. Inside was the first wife's journal and letters. Letters from Marcus, filled with rage and threats. The journal described his cruelty, her fear that he was poisoning her. He hadn't. He'd just pushed her. "I took the journal and the letters," Eliza whispered. "I was going to the marshal in the morning. But he found me. He knew what I'd found. He tried to get them back." She didn't need to describe the fight. The old faded bruise on her cheek, which Jonah had assumed was from her life on the run, suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. "I ran," she said. "I got out a window." By morning, he'd reported the theft. The jewels, the money, it was all a lie to cover the truth. He knew I had the proof. He posted the bounty knowing a man like you, a man with a reputation, would find me. He was paying to have me silenced one way or another. Jonah listened, his face a mask of stone. But inside something was breaking. He was a man who had been betrayed by fate, by a world that took without reason. He recognized the same wounded, hunted look in her eyes. He had seen liars. He had seen killers. And looking at Eliza Vance, he knew with a certainty that settled in his very bones that she was telling the truth. He stood up, his tall frame filling the tiny shack. He walked over to her. She flinched, a lifetime of conditioning making her brace for a blow. Instead, he knelt, his movements stiff from the cold. He took the key from his pocket and unlocked the iron ring from her ankle. The chain fell away with a soft metallic thud. The sound was the loudest thing Eliza had ever heard. It was the sound of freedom. Jonah stood and offered her his hand, pulling her to her feet. "My apologies, ma'am," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "Looks like I've been hunting the wrong person. From this moment on, you're not my prisoner. You're under my protection." Eliza stared at him, tears welling, and for the first time since she'd fled Prescott, she let them fall. The thaw had begun. The click of the lock opening was the sound of a new life beginning. But their newfound alliance would be tested before they could even draw a full breath. They were weak, low on food, and the snow was still too deep to travel. They were allies, but they were still trapped. 2 days later, as Jonah was scouting a path from the roof, he saw them. 2 figures, dark against the endless white, moving slowly on horseback. "Get inside," he said, his voice a low growl. "And bar the door." "Who is it?" Eliza asked, her heart seizing. "Bounty hunters," Jonah said, sliding down from the roof, his rifle in his hands. "Dutch and Smiley. They must have picked up my trail before the storm hit and hunkered down somewhere." He checked his rifle, his movements economical and deadly. He handed Eliza his spare revolver. "You know how to use this? My fiancé taught me." "Marcus," he insisted. The irony was bitter. "Good. Stay away from the window. And don't fire unless I'm down." The 2 riders approached, their rifles held casually across their saddles. They were not expecting a fight. They stopped 20 yards from the cabin. "Ho, the shack!" a voice called out. It was Dutch, a big man with a thick beard caked in ice. "Flint, we know you're in there." "We saw the smoke." "We also know you got the Vance woman." Jonah opened the door a crack. "What's it to you, Dutch?" "The bounty's high, Flint." "High enough to split 3 ways. Just send her out. No need for blood. We'll tell Thorne you put up a hell of a fight." Jonah looked at Eliza. She was pale, her hands trembling, but she held the revolver pointed at the floor, her eyes fixed on him. She was terrified, but she wasn't broken. "She's not for sale, Dutch," Jonah shouted back. There was a moment of silence. Then Dutch laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Don't be a fool, Flint. You gonna die for a woman who ain't yours? A woman who's probably been lying to you?" "She's under my protection," Jonah said, his voice flat and final. "You want her, you come through me. I'm giving you till the count of 3 to ride out." 1, he didn't get to 2. Dutch raised his rifle and the world exploded. The first shot tore through the wooden door, splintering it, passing so close to Jonah's head it singed his hair. Jonah fired back, not at Dutch, but at his horse. The animal screamed and fell, pinning Dutch's leg. Smiley, the other hunter, leaped from his horse and dove behind a snowdrift, firing as he moved. Bullets ripped through the thin walls of the shack. "Get down," Jonah yelled, shoving Eliza toward the stone hearth. He moved to the small window, trying to get a clear shot at Smiley. He saw the man's hat rise above the drift and fired. The hat flew, but Smiley was already moving, rolling, coming up on one knee. He fired at the window. Jonah ducked, but not fast enough. A bullet, hot as a poker, slammed into his left shoulder, spinning him around. He cried out a sharp gasp of pain and fell, his rifle clattering to the floor. "Jonah!" Eliza screamed. Smiley, seeing Jonah fall, stood up with a triumphant grin and began to advance on the cabin. "It's over, Flint." "Just send the woman out!" Jonah, bleeding badly, tried to reach for his rifle, but his arm wouldn't obey. "Eliza," he gasped, "the revolver." "Stay low." But Eliza was already moving. She didn't hide. She didn't cower. She stepped past Jonah, her face a mask of pale, cold fury. She raised the heavy revolver with both hands, just as Marcus Thorne had taught her. Smiley was 10 yards from the door, his own gun raised. Eliza fired. The shot was deafening in the small space. Smiley stopped, his grin vanishing, replaced by a look of pure shock. He looked down at his leg, where a dark stain was spreading rapidly on the snow. He hadn't been killed, but he was wounded. He cursed, a string of vile words, fired one last wild shot into the snow, and then turned, stumbling and scrambling to get to his horse. Dutch, still trapped under his own dead mount, was yelling for him, but Smiley didn't look back. He hauled himself into the saddle and fled, disappearing back into the trees. Dutch, seeing his partner abandon him, raised his hands. "Don't shoot, Flint!" "Don't shoot!" "I give up." The cabin was silent, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood. Eliza's revolver was still raised, her arms shaking. She looked at Jonah, who was slumped against the wall, his eyes closed, a pool of blood spreading on the floor. "Jonah," she whispered. He didn't answer. The siege was over, but the real battle had just begun. The sound of the retreating horse faded, replaced by a new, more terrible sound, the ragged, wet sound of Jonah's breathing. Dutch was still outside, yelling that he'd given up, but Eliza ignored him. She dropped the revolver and rushed to Jonah's side. "Jonah, stay with me." He was unconscious, his skin pale and clammy. The bullet had hit him high in the shoulder, and he was bleeding badly. She knew if she didn't stop the bleeding, he would die. She was free. She could walk out that door, past the trapped bounty hunter, and leave. She could take Jonah's horse, Smiley had left it, and ride for Prescott. She could be free, but she looked at the man who had unchained her, the man who had taken a bullet for her, the man who had believed her when no one else would. "I'm not leaving you," she said, her voice fierce. "We survived this together, or not at all." She tore a strip from her petticoat and pressed it hard against the wound, staunching the flow of blood. She dragged him closer to the fire, her muscles straining. "Dutch!" she yelled out the door. "Don't shoot, ma'am." "I'm pinned." "My leg's broke." "Good," she yelled back. "You stay right there. If you move, I'll finish what I started." For the next 2 days, Eliza fought a war on 2 fronts. Outside, she kept Dutch alive, throwing him scraps of food and melted snow, keeping him a prisoner with the threat of Jonah's rifle. Inside, she fought for Jonah's life. The wound was bad and fever set in. He became delirious, calling out for Sarah and Thomas, the wife and son he had lost. Eliza's heart ached for him. She knew the bullet was still in him. If it stayed, the infection would kill him. She had to get it out. Her hands trembled. She had never done anything like this. But she thought of her mother, who had known about herbs, and she thought of the cold, practical lessons Marcus Thorne had given her, teaching her to be a strong companion. She sterilized Jonah's hunting knife in the fire until the blade glowed red. She found the last of his whiskey and cleaned the wound, ignoring his groans. She took a deep breath, prayed to a God she hadn't spoken to in years, and began to probe the wound. It was a nightmare of blood and pain. He thrashed even in his unconscious state, but she found it, a flattened piece of lead lodged against his collarbone. She managed to pry it out, then stitched the wound closed with a needle and thread from her own small sewing kit. For another day, he lay on the edge of death. Eliza sat by his side, bathing his face, forcing willow bark tea between his cracked lips. She didn't sleep. As she worked, something was happening outside. The world was changing. The temperature rose. The snow began to melt. The sound of dripping water was everywhere. The great die-up was finally breaking. Spring was coming. On the 4th morning, Jonah's fever broke. He woke, his eyes clear for the first time. He saw her, asleep in the chair, her face smudged with soot and exhaustion, her hand resting on his arm. "Eliza?" he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. Her eyes flew open. "Jonah, you're awake!" Relief, so powerful it was dizzying, washed over her. He looked at his bandaged shoulder, then at her. You saved me. I tried." He looked at this woman, who had been his prisoner, who had faced down 2 bounty hunters, and who had chosen to stay and fight for his life. "Eliza," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "I am a broken man. I have nothing left to offer a woman like you." It was the echo of what he'd heard in his own head for years, the words of the woman who had left him, that he was too hard, too cold. He was unlovable. Eliza looked at him, at this strong, silent man who had been shattered by grief. She saw his pain, and it no longer frightened her. She leaned close, placing her hand gently on his unshaven cheek. "You're wrong, Jonah," she whispered. "You offered me my life. You offered me your trust. You took a bullet for me. You can't love a man like me," he said, his voice breaking. I'm empty." She smiled, a real, radiant smile that lit up the dark cabin. "Too late, Jonah. Way too late for that." He pulled her to him, his good arm wrapping around her, and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of desperation, of gratitude, of 2 broken souls finding a way to be whole. Outside, the first green shoot of a mountain crocus was pushing its way through the snow. It was true. It was too late for anything but the life that lay before them. The spring that melted the snows of 1887 was a spring of rebirth for the land. And for them. When Jonah was strong enough to ride, they dealt with Dutch. They splinted his broken leg, put him on Smiley's horse, and Jonah rode with him to the nearest marshal's office, along with the proof of Dutch's attack. Then, they rode to Prescott. It was not a long trial. When Eliza Vance, presumed dead, walked into the courtroom with the fearsome Flint McAllister at her side, Marcus Thorne's world collapsed. The letters and the journal she had so carefully preserved, combined with Jonah's unflinching testimony, were enough. Thorne was arrested, his reign of power and terror over. The law for once had worked. Jonah collected the bounty on Dutch and the captured Smiley, but the money felt different now. It wasn't blood money. It was a beginning. We jump forward 1 year to the spring of 1888. The scene is not a dark, cramped line shack, but a wide, beautiful valley, high in the mountains, far from any settlement. A new cabin stands by a clear running creek, this one built not with desperation, but with care. Smoke rises from the chimney in a steady, peaceful column. Jonah is splitting wood, his movements strong and sure, his shoulder long since healed. He moves with a lightness Eliza had never seen in him, the ghosts of his past finally at rest. Eliza is in a garden she has planted, her hands in the rich earth, tending to rows of beans and herbs. Her hair is free, tied back with a simple ribbon. She is no longer pale and haunted. The mountain sun has given her a healthy glow, and her eyes are bright with life. She is also visibly pregnant, her body full with the promise of their new life. She stands to stretch, one hand on her back, the other on her belly. Jonah stops his work and walks over to her. He doesn't say anything, just wraps his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "It's a good life, Jonah," she says quietly, looking out at the vast, beautiful wilderness that is their home. "It's the only life," he murmurs, placing his large calloused hand over hers on her stomach. He feels the baby kick, and a slow, genuine smile spreads across his face. A new beginning. Eliza leans back against his chest, her heart full. A new frontier, she agrees. And so the bounty hunter who had lost his family, and the fugitive who had none, found their rescue not in the wilderness, but in each other. They had faced the white hell of the blizzard and the darkness of men's hearts, and had emerged into the sunlight. They had built a new frontier, not of land, but of love, a place where two broken souls could finally, and completely, be home. Thank you for joining us for that tale on Frontier Rescue Stories. If Jonah and Eliza's journey from captivity to love touched your heart, please show your support by giving this video a like and sharing it with someone who appreciates a story of survival and second chances. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We have a whole playlist of stories just like this one waiting for you, and we wouldn't want you to miss what's coming next. We truly love our community here. What did you think of their story? And what kind of frontier rescue would you like to hear us tell next? Let us know in the comments below. We read everyone and love hearing your ideas. From all of us here at Frontier Rescue Stories, we wish you warmth, safety, and all the best. We'll see you in the next story.